Welcome to Boiling Point, the podcast to motivate ever-evolving entrepreneurs and forward-thinking movement pioneers. Our hosts, filmmaker Greg Hemmings and executive coach Dave Vale, are turning up the heat in the world's business communities. Our interviews with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and movement makers are raising the temperature of inspiration. Live from the hottest studio in this quadrant of the universe, here are Dave and Greg.
Okay, Dave. Well, this is the first time, Dave, that we've been able to do a double hitter. Is that what we call them in sports?
Sure. Let's go with that. Can Sean hear us right now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Yes. So we're rolling this in. This is great. This is unless Genevieve edits them into two pieces. This very well may be one epic episode with two incredible epic guests. Or not. Hard to say. We'll see what Genevieve does with it.
Yeah, we'll see if I can redefine your view of what epic is all about here.
Good. Okay. So,
and I want to start by apologizing for my confusing email to you, Sean. I'm just reading it now. So yeah. So you're on. We're great. I just recognized we had the same Zoom link for both you and Kelly, and it didn't even occur to me that you know each other. I was talking about our other guest and I sent them a very confusing email with the wrong time. And it's a great example of why I should not multitask. Greg is actually a quite accomplished multitasker, I've noticed. Me, not so much. But thank you for coming on. And Sean Ryan's been on before as well.
Yeah.
And we've done some fun work together. You and Greg and I, Sean. And then we've also done some work through your Vision Coaching's done some work or collaborated maybe with you in looking at some business opportunities with Whitewater Consulting. And you and I were chatting and talking about some business development. And Greg, it occurred to me about how much Sean's business is, like your business has been massively disrupted, right? With, Hemmings House and how you get out and, you've pivoted. And then Sean and I were talking, and Sean, and I'll let you describe how you would typically offer services maybe over the last 20, 30 years, Sean, through Whitewater. And I think you guys could compete, you and Greg, in terms of air miles in a calendar year.
Well, there's been times where we've actually sat behind each other on the airplanes. I'm like,
That's right.
Yep, Sean's traveling again. So is Greg.
Yeah.
You just had Kelly on, and it's interesting. Half the time that I cross paths with Kelly, it's in some airport somewhere too. So yeah, we've all been out riding the range a little bit.
Well, and you have and a real road warrior. So maybe a little bit about for the listeners about Whitewater Consulting and what you do and how you would traditionally deliver the service, and then let's get into kind of where things are now and how you're doing and what you're learning and how things are evolving.
Sure. Well, it's a little bit ironic in a way. Dave, you mentioned Whitewater Consulting. When I've been in the consulting world for a little bit over 30 years, but about 20 years ago, I founded Whitewater Consulting. And there's a message behind the metaphor, which is the whole idea of Whitewater Consulting was to help clients deal with a world of perpetual whitewater. I would say that what we've gone through over the last 8 weeks is far beyond perpetual whitewater. It's more like being in Class 6 rapids, the most dangerous, death-defying rapids, and then all of a sudden you plunge over Niagara Falls. And so just the mere idea of everything that we've all had to grapple with and are going to continue to grapple with for a while around Whitewater Consulting. And yeah, to your point, things have, even though we've always done some work virtually in the last 6-7 weeks, adapting to where virtually everything we do is being done virtually. Yeah. And so it's forced us. And one of the things I think that I've thought a lot about over the last couple of weeks has been, it's not just doing the work virtually. It's forcing us to fundamentally rethink how the work gets done. Take some strategy work we've been doing with a client where we would have done the typical, 1 or 2 day offsite session. We had a couple of those processes going on with clients at the same time, right when COVID hit. And the first one, we ended up we did it as we might have done a traditional one-day session. We just did it with web conference. And so we forced everybody that was in this group, 16, 17 people, through a full day web conference. And it worked pretty well. But then we had another session going with a different client a week or so later, and we had a chance to rethink it a little bit. And we thought, if we're going to do it virtually, do we have to do a one-day session? The one-day session was really designed, as I reflected upon it, around the travel logistics, getting all the road warriors into a place for a day or day and a half. That had nothing to do with being the best way to get the work done. It had everything to do with, you would never bring people together for 2 hours, send them home, bring them together for 2 hours, send them back home. And so we began to rethink the work and began to break it into the bite-sized pieces that were logical, that you could accomplish in a couple-hour web conference, knowing that 3 or 4 or 5 days, 7 days later, we could get that group back together again. Much better way to get the work done than what we had originally planned. So it's really kind of been fascinating.
Yeah, that's really cool, because I think about, my heart goes out to people in the conference industry right now. I finally realized that this COVID thing was real when South by Southwest shut their doors. I was like, what? That's like one of the biggest conferences on earth. And I was like, and that was like March 10th or 11th, or like it was early,
Yeah.
But one of the other interesting things is, by nature, large group virtual meetups don't work. That's why it's really cool that companies like Zoom and others have the breakout rooms. And what I've been finding is working. So Dave, I've been going on a lot of the Wallace McCain Institute daily webinars, and they shoot you out in these little breakout rooms where there might be 5 or 6 people and a moderator, perhaps. Where there's 5 or 6 people, nobody's going to be drifting off and checking their emails and other things, so it's neat to see how the industry is trying to figure out ways to keep people engaged in this environment. Because I was telling Dave before we started, like we're only 4 or 5 weeks in, I'm already sick and tired of Zoom calls, because I am constantly right here. I don't move. This is it. I'm in front of the screen the whole day. At the end of the day, I want to drink so bad. Anywho,
but how's that different than a regular day?
Hey, come on, Greg. The beauty of work from anywhere is you don't have to wait to the end of the day to drink. You just start day drinking earlier.
That's a second. Who else said that, Dave? Dr. Bill said that.
Bill Howard. Yeah, we were joking about that.
But it is neat to see how you've adapted for training. That makes so much sense. Like little 2 hour or 1 hour nuggets spread over a longer period of time. You can get way more engagement that way. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, we're doing the same thing with some of our training content, where it's not just a strategy session, which is always a facilitated conversation, but even with our training content, we're having the opportunity to rethink it and think about what's best done asynchronously. There's a lot of learning people can do on their own before we get them together on a web conference, okay, or in a web training room. And then even when we have them together in that web training room, might be a group of, 15 people or 50 people or 100 people, using the capability to put them into virtual breakout rooms. And so now we've got people in maybe 3 different parts of the universe in a breakout session, working on practicing some skill or capability together. And our facilitators have the ability to be in each of those rooms to see what's going on and provide feedback in the moment. It's actually, used correctly, used well, it's at least as good as what we would have done in a classroom. And in a lot of cases, it's better.
You know what? Do you find that, why is it that we have to be forced into this to appreciate this? I guess that's the question maybe that's on my mind, because a number of years ago, we were delivering training this way. I'm sure you deliver training this way. And, but it seems to be the least, I don't say the least favored option, but there's something that I feel like we're almost hardwired to say we should, when at all possible, we should be together physically. And that's not everyone, but I feel that. And a lot of times that's what our clients want. They want and a lot of times, one of the barriers to some of the coaching in people's minds initially can be, well, oh, you mean so the coach isn't actually going to come on site? And we say we can, but the price changes, and usually that, oh, okay, maybe we don't need that. But is it as effective? Can you actually coach someone remotely? And it depends on what they want to be coached on, naturally, and it depends on people's understanding of what coaching is. But with certain, I find industries maybe, and in certain particular clients, that's a big barrier. It's a big obstacle for them to get over mentally, this idea that you're not going to be on site and in person.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think part of it is the mental model, the thinking, the assumptions, the beliefs that it's better in person. Look, I suffer from that myself a little bit. And when we were doing these strategy sessions and we realized we were going to have to do them virtually, my first reaction was, okay, this, we'll try to do the best we can. Hopefully we get it kind of close and to what it would be like if we were doing it in person. And then we did the first session and it was like, okay, that wasn't just close. That was really close. And then by the time we did the second session, I got to the point of not only was that close, these components of it were better. There was with the second client we were doing the strategy work with, we actually were able to invite in other people to the conference who we would never have flown across the continent to be together. Right. I mean, we would have doubled the travel cost to have people, but by expanding the group out, we got better conversation. We got more expertise involved. It's when that began to trigger for me, this is actually better done virtually than it's done than if we did it live. Right.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate, because it's funny, like when speaking of coaching, I remember, going to Royal Roads, and this is 2004, 2005. And they were talking about this idea of coaching, over the phone or using, I guess maybe back then you could use Skype maybe. And I just remember, that's not going to work. Like my brain couldn't believe it. Right. It wasn't until the first thing I did was I hired, the person I could find that I felt was the best coach for me at the time. She lived on the West Coast, and I had this experience. It was an amazing experience, but I had to kind of get over my own thinking around that it's going to be a suboptimal experience. And when I experienced it, there was no turning back, because I would, like as a recipient, you know what I mean? Like I was like, oh, as the client, I went like, well, geez. And then it became really exciting. But you have to sometimes have the experience to even appreciate that it could be the same or maybe better in some ways.
Yes. Yeah. And absolutely right. Yeah.
Not always better, but it has that potential, right?
Right. Well, we're social beings, right? And as humans, we like the social contact. We like the face-to-face contact. We like the ability to build relationships. But all three of us, I'm sure, have done a lot of work, doing as much work as I do on both sides of the U.S.-Canada border. I've got financial advisors in the United States. I've got accountants in the States who I've never met. And I have an enormous amount, I've placed, some component of my financial future in their hands. I have an enormous amount of trust for them, and I've never met them, right?
Like physically met them,
I've never physically met them, though I've met them virtually, dozens of times. So I think it's analogous to what you deal with, in the coaching world, is your coaches building trust, building those relationships with people, and being able to do that very effectively virtually in, almost as well as you can, certainly face to face, right?
I got a question for both of you, and it's related to people's comfort level and maybe personality type, right? So I was talking to a colleague. I treat him; he's actually be a mentor to me. And he said, we're doing it by phone. He goes, do you want to do this by Zoom? And I'm like, no, phone's fine. Like, I really don't want to stare at you. And I said that because I know him well enough to say that. And I've seen a lot of people pushing to do Zoom, and I'm just like, I just rather talk on the phone. And he goes, Dave, are you an extrovert? Are you an introvert? And I said, well, actually I did I did this assessment, and the term ambivert came up, which is you kind of you straddle both sides. You're right in the middle there somewhere. And he said, well, I have a theory about, how much extroverts seem to like this kind of thing. And then the introverts are just fine, with no camera on. What do you guys think? What's your opinion?
Oh yeah, go ahead, you, Sean.
No, I think it's just a matter of whether I put on a clean T-shirt this morning.
There's that too, because it's kind of nice to have your hoodie on,
Right.
no shave. Well, you haven't shaven, so I guess. I look at my hair's going crazy, so that's a good point.
Yeah, for me, just like I said earlier, I've always enjoyed this format. As you know, Dave, I've been using Zoom for a couple of years, and I find the conversations I'm having previous to COVID on Zoom are client relations and business development, and I want to see people in their eye to eye, because there's something about building trust with people you don't know when you can see them, and so I've enjoyed that. Now during this period where there's 6 hours of Zoom calls every day, the other day I just took the baby out for a stroll and put my earbuds in and had a regular telephone call with somebody. I was like, this is awesome. I got to start doing this more. This is great. I get to walk around and, talk on the phone. So, and the other thing is I find as the whole world kind of goes on to video calls, we're going to start seeing some real pressures on our bandwidth. And there's issues like you stalling, you're going to freeze frame there, Dave, on the last call. So yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's going to peter off a little bit. I enjoy it. I don't enjoy being on it all day. And it's like there's an abnormal amount of invites for awesome webinars that are relevant that I want to learn about and stuff. It's just that there's more of it going on right now. So yeah, that's my answer. That's a very ambient or ambivert answer, isn't it?
Ambivert. Well,
all kidding aside about T-shirts and stuff, for me, it's a little bit situational, right? If I was going to talk to either one of you one-on-one and we're just having a phone call works great, right? I do think there's a benefit, just even this Zoom conversation that we're having, being able to see both of you and feel virtually like we're in the same room, right? When we're doing big web conferences with people, or at least, when we've got 15 or 20 people involved in a conversation, I actually like that far better with a video conference than with just phones, right? Because I think being on the video conference creates a little bit of accountability to not be checking your email, not be checking your text, to be fully engaged in the conversation that we're trying to have. Whereas if we're one-on-one on a phone call, I know you're engaged in the phone call, right? So it's a little situation.
That's actually, those are really good points. That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny, Greg was saying, building trust and seeing someone, and maybe it's a little different, but I found that sometimes there's safety and a little bit of anonymity, from a coaching relationship. And we have a lot of business external to the province and the region, and we have a lot of business right in the region. And we've recently, and I was expecting this to happen a lot longer, but recently we had one of our bigger clients request that unless a kind of a circumstance that kind of the very very few circumstances that would appear, what they wanted us to do is use external coaches to the region, like use people like from away, if you will. And the theory was that a lot of people felt more comfortable engaging people that weren't in the region because they don't want to probably run across the city market or whatever. I've always kind of believed that, and I would always. So ironically, Greg, that whole trust, sometimes when you're fully in the moment listening, and you can hear things that the visual, for me anyways, kind of gets in the way of, like, how am I looking right now, versus when you're just listening, you can hear things in a voice, you can hear cadence of speech, tightness of voice, you can hear all these things that can help. I don't know, it just encourages a different type of listening in me, I find. And sometimes the seeing each other is the part that gets in the way.
Well, it's like you said, it's situational. That makes 100% sense. Just last week, somebody was asking me about you, about executive coaching, and saying, "Well, how do they do it? Do they do it virtually?" I'm always trying to sell you, Dave. You see, and
good man, Greg.
And I said, "Yeah, Dave does it, but he prefers phone calls because it's a deeper connection in that." And I fully get that. I understand that. And the other truth in a coaching situation, um, the person you're coaching might not be at that point of vulnerability yet to
Right.
allow you, the coach, to see you tear up or whatever it is, right? So you might be able to get further in your line of business. I think in the world of consulting with communication within teams, having team meetings where it's face to face, I think is really, really important. We've been doing that every single morning, doing the 45 minutes actual. It's hard to do it tighter than that for us. Everybody touching base, seeing what projects are going on. I find that super powerful to see my team face to face. So it's all situational. And Sean, does this impact how you consult with your clients? Are you having these conversations at all?
Well, I think, Greg, absolutely. We're, as I said, we've moved everything, at least temporarily, to complete stuff virtually. We've been incredibly fortunate, knock on wood, that a lot of our business has not disappeared. Even with some of our clients who've, really in some ways almost shut down their operations, we've delayed some things. But we've continued to be able to work, and again, all of it is has shifted virtually. It's going to be very interesting to see when things begin to gravitate toward what I call the next normal. I don't even like the term anymore of new normal. This will date me quite a bit, but we've all been, regardless of how old we are, we've been through various sorts of cataclysmic events, whether it's the financial crash of 2008, the internet crash of 2000, going through, 9/11 in 2001, going back farther. We've all been through things that have shaped, some kind of future. And we invariably call it, okay, what's the new normal going to be? Because we're not going to go back to the old normal. I think we've now been through so many of these cycles over our lifetimes. It's the next normal. And we have to be constantly, I call it, nimble method, steadfast focus. What's your game plan? Where are you trying to get to? But be very nimble about how you plan to get to that place. Because you have the world's going to be constantly shifting around you, and you have to be prepared to be there, right?
Yeah, So, and actually, I kind of love that terminology. It'll be really interesting to see do you have any predictions in terms of, or maybe I'm not asking for prediction, but what are you hearing clients ask for right now, Sean? And we're in the eye of the storm, it feels
Right.
like anyways. I'm just curious, what are the sort of things that, and you have a lot of long-term relationships with these clients. So you're joined at the hip. You go deep and long with folks. From what I understand, what are people looking for now? What are their needs, you think?
Again, a lot of our clients are asking us to do work virtually that in the past we would have done face to face, right? And so even though, and to the point that you all made earlier, there's always been some interest in that. This has put a huge, jet power behind the move to get virtual. Okay. In addition to that, I think if you think more about their businesses, we're starting to see, and I think we're going to see more of this, is when as we begin to gravitate into that next normal, thinking back on what were we well prepared to deal with, what were we not prepared to deal with as the universe, fell off the cliff with COVID-19, and how do we be better prepared for the future? And, one of the observations that I would make is that the organizations, whether it's a charity, a nonprofit, a for-profit business, the organizations that hit the COVID-19 storm, that had their balance sheet, and I think the broadest perspective of the balance sheet, not just their financial balance sheet, but their balance sheet with their customers, right? The trust and relationships they had with their customers, and the relationships that they had with their human capital, their team. The organizations that were in the best shape there are probably best prepared to exit and come out of the other side in pretty good shape. The organizations that didn't have good financial balance sheets, didn't have good, necessarily great relationships, a good balance sheet with their customers or their stakeholders, didn't have a great, balance sheet with their team members, and maybe even took some actions that weaken that connection with their team. They're gonna potentially struggle on the other side. And I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in, to get prepared for the next normal. How do we do a better job around all of those things?
Right on. That's really, that's great. I love that. That's really helpful. I know you were looking at, we talked, I think on our last podcast about an upcoming book, and, you're working through it madly. I know there's been some updates. I don't know if Greg knows. I don't know. And I don't know if this is an appropriate time to ask or not, but I'm just curious about the book and
Sure.
where you're at.
Well, the book has actually been one of the silver linings in the COVID crisis for me personally has been being able to keep the book on track. The current, and we may end up changing it because it may not be a good time to launch it, but the publisher intends to launch the book on June 4th, which is super exciting. And I have a deadline of tomorrow. For the last 2 weeks, I've been going through the page proofs, what the book actually looks like, which is pretty exciting on one hand. Though I do, the depressing side of that is I now believe that no author should ever be forced to look at the page proofs of their book, because I don't know about other people, but I want to rewrite the whole thing. And I thought it was pretty good to begin with, and I want to rewrite the whole thing. But the silver lining in this cloud has been when I committed to being able to review the page proofs by tomorrow, my travel schedule was 100% booked. I was literally on the road every day for the last 3.5, 4 weeks. And I was like, okay, I have to commit to that deadline. There's no way in hell I'm going to make that deadline. How am I? Well, by not traveling, the amount of efficiency that obviously some work has moved around, some of it's been delayed, some things have been done virtually, but just being here has been incredibly more efficient. I'm actually going to make my deadline, so I'm pretty excited about that. So we're keeping the book on track online to hit hopefully a June 4th publication date, and hopefully people will be in a brain space that they'll be looking for something to read by then.
And we'll definitely promote it.
Yes, let's plug it.
And I want to share this that just came up from my 7-year-old.
Because she's got probably a 3:30 appointment, so that's awesome. So Kaya, we're releasing your dad. Whitewater Consulting. How do people find you, Sean? Oh, it's Willow. Hi, Willow.
Yeah, they find us at www.ici.com, whippy.com.
Perfect. And I want to do a little plug. I think for Greg, a cool animated video that he could do for Whitewater Consulting, I think it could be amazing. Sean, if you haven't seen the one Greg did for me a number of years ago, I know, he'll say, it could be way better now, but it's still a pretty cool one from 2013. That's how his pivots happened. And I just was thinking about the visual as Sean was describing it. So a little plug for you.
Let's talk, Sean, sometime if you want some animations. It's we're producing lots of them.
That's fantastic. I'm sure I need lots of animations, Greg.
I love it. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for being with us.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for both your time, and everybody stay healthy and stay safe, and look forward to crossing paths when we get a chance.
Awesome.
Amen.
Take care.
Okay, we'll start our day drinking, guys.
And it's on.
All right, sounds good.
See ya.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Boiling Point. Remember to rate and subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Boiling Point Pod. To see more from Dave Vale, check out leadershipunleashed.ca or visioncoachinginc.com, and on Twitter at Dave_Vale. And to catch up with Greg, visit hemmingshouse.com and at Greg Hemmings on Twitter. Thanks for listening, and remember, keep that pot boiling.